Hello everybody and welcome to VFR. Today we are looking at why you should fly the PMDG DC-6, one of my favorite planes that I've flown in the sim, one that's taught me quite a lot. And yeah, it's just a really enjoyable, pretty unique experience in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we are here in northeastern India, a little southwest of the town of Dibrugarh. An old airfield, I think it's still in use, but an Indian Air Force base. And today we're going to be flying what I'm calling a historic heritage flight, where we're going to be taking a group of sightseers across some of the famous routes of aviation history. And in this particular one, we're going to be flying over the Hump, crossing the Himalayas to retrace the path traced by Allied flyers during World War II, when they followed this route to ferry much-needed supplies into China to help them resist the Japanese invasion. Now, between 1942 and 1945, the Japanese occupied Burma, now Myanmar, and that blocked off access to China, to the sea, to the Allies. And China, fighting alongside the Allies, needed supplies. So these were the way that Allied pilots, Allied airplanes, any American airmen who went down over Japan or China would have had to come out this way. So it's remained the main supply route for the Allies into China. And by all accounts, it was a fairly dangerous route to take, especially in airplanes like this. So contemporarily, it'd be flown by DC-3s and DC-4s, or C-54s, and C-47s. DC-6 comes later than that. So this would not be the airplane flying this route, but we do experience a lot of the same factors in our decision-making, a lot of the same designs as those airplanes. So should be an interesting exercise. All right, so before we set off on our journey, let's get over to the table and talk through the chart. Now, this is more important than DC-6 than most airplanes just because of how we have to fly. It's a little bit different from your modern airliners. We're going to have to pre-plan, where we descend a lot more intentionally. And how we climb out is going to actually be pretty important here, too. So, we're going to be flying a VR to VOR and an NDB in here. So we're not going to be using GPS today, although you can in the DC-6. This is where we are here at Chabua Airport, VECA. We are going to be departing out to the east, roughly 094, and we're going to track this VOR DRG outbound until we hit this NDB at Putao on 340. We're going to turn slightly to our right to a heading of 102 outbound from Putao until we pick up the Lijiang VOR, LJA, out here. About 160 miles after that, we're going to head across China and to the XFA at Panlong, and that'll be right into Kunming. So again, this is going to be important for us. We're going to have to pick our descent point fairly carefully within here, also because there's terrain to consider as well. Kunming is at an elevation of about 6,900 feet. All right, so welcome to the flight deck. We are here, the crew, which consists of our flight engineer and co-pilot. They've already got the airplane all set up through the artificial flight engineer here on the EFB. Fuel and load today, we've got full main tanks and just a little bit of fuel in all the aux tanks, just in case something happens. Pretty light in terms of passengers, just 30 passengers. They're going to be very comfortable back there, and 1,000 pounds of baggage and cargo. Now, they were all ready for engine start. I've been manipulating the artificial flight engineer. This is one of the fun things about this airplane, is that you don't have to fly it all yourself. In real world, this plane is flown by a crew of 3 people. I'm just me, and so having this really helps me jump in and out of this plane. But you can still learn it all if you want to. You can flip every switch in the before start and after start checklist and all that. It's good to learn, but if you fly a lot of different things, it can be hard to remember. So AFE, I lean on them pretty heavily. And we've got before start already done. So they're ready for me to start the engines. They're just waiting on me. And engine start in this plane is, again, it's a little bit, I don't want to say a chore, because I don't think it's a chore. But it just takes some doing, and it's not too complicated. But again, it's a little unique compared to other things, more modern airplanes. We got to verify a few things. Boost pumps are on low, engine selector going to 3. Our magnetos need to be on both. We're going to start in the order of engine 3, engine 4, engine 2, and then engine 1. So those 3 things are configured. come down here and make sure that we have fuel pressure in engine 3. We do. And we'll hit the start button. If he's going to start counting, we're going to go at 9. We're going to hit boost, then prime, and then come down and hit the mixture into auto rich. And then come back to the panel here. I have custom views set up so I can do this all fairly quickly. But, you know, you're just going to have to devise a system for it. So that's engine 1 going. Helps if you close all the doors. And I'm not going to go through all of the rest of it because, again, if you want all this cockpit set up in detail, there are other videos on this channel, and other people have done good videos as well. So check that out. But it's the same process, and if we fail for whatever reason, verify everything's right and try again.
Start selected boost pumps. Off and off. Battery switch. Plane battery. Generators and inverters. Checked and on. Emergency lights. Armed. Ground power. Removed.
Alright, so we are all set up and ready to rock here. Winds are going to be about 15 knots out of the northeast. I think it's 064, so we're going to head over to runway 05 off to our right. Taxi out. Once we get there, the guys will run the before takeoff checklist, and then we'll get into it. Alright, so we've got the before takeoff checks done. We are going to roll out onto the runway and get set for takeoff. Now, takeoff is going to be assisted with the AFE and our crew again. It's another piece of the airplane, just makes you feel like you're flying with a crew. They're going to manage the throttle and power settings, so all I'm going to ask them to do is start the checklist, and then my job is to hold the stick and not pull back too hard when we rotate. We are at 86,000 pounds today, so we're going to be doing a dry takeoff. Just means we're not going to use water injection. And we don't need to use the full power we have available with water injection. So we're waiting for full power set, and then I release the wheel brakes and keep us on the runway. We're going to rotate at about 100 knots, and then just gently pulling back on the stick, we'll gently climb out, and we will be turning off to our right. And aim for a heading of 094 or thereabouts.
Full power, please. Going full power.
And just keeping a scan. I have lost engines in weird spots before on takeoff. And there's our cue. So just keep an eye and make sure all these gauges on the bottom right-hand corner of my screen are, they're all pointing in the same direction. If something's pointing in a different direction, something's up. And airspeed is live. We're passing 60 knots. There's 80. And 100, just gently pulling back just a little bit. And just let it glide.
Gear up. Gear selected up. Gear up, lights up, flaps up. Flaps going up.
They're coming back to climb power of 40 inches
Power set.
of manifold pressure. They're going to run through a post-takeoff checklist. We're going to hold 165 knots or so on our climb out. We're going to be climbing to, aiming for 14,000 feet initially, and then we'll see what's in front of us. I'm just going to come right until we intercept the radial 094 outbound from our VOR, which is DRG. We should be pretty close to it. And we need to make the most of this valley, because you see way out in front of us, we've got mountains, and we're going to have some pretty tall peaks. We're not crossing the meat of the Himalayas, but the 20,000 foot peaks, but we are going to see 15,000 feet. I'm just going to trim out. And one underrated thing about this airplane, for such a big, old, kind of honking thing, it is fun to hand fly. It's just a pretty stable platform, especially if you're where it wants to be. And underrated aspect of the DC6. Alright, and we're going to climb on out. I'm going to bring nose trim down just a touch. And we'll get autopilot set up. Again, like other things in this airplane, autopilot is a little... arcane isn't the right word, but it's a little funky. You have to hit this switch and then click the lever in, and that'll get it going. We control the pitch with this knob, and then our roll with this bigger knob on top. And then the silver button resets it. Very simple. It's actually very effective. And in fact, we're looking good. Once you see the localizer start to come in, we can hick it over into localizer mode, and it'll follow whatever radial we program in. Now, I've lost a lot of climb, so I'm going to have to tell the airplane to pull back a little bit. So again, it's just old school and simple. Now, the DC6 is an interesting airplane. It's comes in, it's really a result of all, design-wise, of all the work done during the war by Douglas. It's kind of conceived in that time period, and it's produced between 1946 and 1956, so the immediate post-war. It's originally a U.S. Army project that they wanted to expand on the DC-4 or C-54, which again was a common heavy transport during the late Second World War. We have an airliner variant and a cargo variant. The Navy also has their own variants, and there were many produced, so there's some variations among them. But it was renowned. It really was one of a driving prop liner that could transport lots of people and, again, help expand the role of commercial aviation. It could do a transatlantic flight non-stop without a headwind, something I want to try. Haven't done it yet. And President Harry Truman used it as his, I use air quotes, Air Force One. It wouldn't have that call sign at the time, I don't think. He called it the Independence, painted it like an eagle. It's quite the paint scheme. And it's been used all over the world, and, you know, most have been retired and out of service, but still in limited cargo use today, most notably in Alaska with Everett's Air Cargo. There's fewer and fewer of them flying, but they do use them up north in cold weather where reliability is important. These are very, very reliable aircraft. All right, so we're pretty well set. We're climbing out at about 1,000 feet per minute. We could even crank that up a little bit. But yeah, it is a very interesting, fun airplane with a lot of history to it. Big Cold War aircraft if you're interested in the some of those flights across Europe. We've done a few of those on the channel. And yeah, it's just a good, very historic airplane. Now, looking around the cockpit, if you like this kind of, I love the bungee cord and all the gauges. It reminds me of it reminds me of an Explorer's airplane. So that's I really like the visual of it, the big padded shelf. And all the gauges around here. I mean, there's a few main sections of the cockpit. Your primary flight display is up here. Your engine parameters, your engine monitoring is kind of this center panel. Your center console has all the bits and bobs that you have to hit and touch and manipulate to fly the actual airplane. And up here you got fuel and lights and cowl flaps and all that kind of thing. And then the starter panel up behind us. We have radios. You can put in a modern GPS if you want to. I go back and forth. It is nice to fly with it because you can follow GPS waypoints, but not strictly speaking required. Now, I do have the first few VORs programmed in as well. It's a big theme of this airplane is it's really important to think ahead. Even though we have the artificial flight engineer helping us out with a lot of the more menial tasks of flipping switches, we're still the pilot, and this airplane, I think, has a higher pilot workload than a few other airplanes. Especially with airplanes with auto throttle, and it's not necessarily... well, I mean, you could say it's worse. It's a different challenge because you're dealing with different things. You're doing VOR navigation, you're looking at your engines, making sure that your engines are okay. If something goes wrong with your engine, what do? You need to know how to feather your airplane, and you do really need to know that in this airplane because it's probably going to happen to you. Yeah, I don't think you really need to know how to handle a CRJ without one engine in the sim, really. It's good to know. It's interesting, but not, strictly speaking, necessary. I think in the DC6, if you want to fly it seriously, it's necessary. And it's necessary to understand how to fly these how VORs work and how to fly these kinds of flight plans to navigate to where you're going. And you have to think ahead a lot more than in other airplanes too, because the DC6 is not going to respond instantly to what you need. It's not going to dump altitude instantly. You're not going to be able to dump thousands of feet in a minute. So again, it makes me feel like it makes me do better as a virtual pilot because I'm thinking I have to think ahead. I have to calculate, okay, where is our top of descent actually going to be? I'm not just going off what a computer tells me. I'm thinking about, which fuel tanks are we using, how we're actually going to maneuver over these obstacles while still being able to navigate using our radio. There's a lot of stuff that's going through your brain as the pilot. And it's important that you do them right, because if you don't do them right, especially on takeoff and on approach, you can get in some pretty big trouble. All right, so we are level here at about 14,200 feet. And we're coming up on our next waypoint, which is the Paro NDB. Now, we don't have a distance to it, but we have a distance from our last VOR waypoint. And it's 116 nautical miles. At 123, we should be over Paro. Give or take a little bit of lateral distance. At that point, we're going to turn right to a heading of approximately 102. We're going to follow our white ADF needle here to take us inbound to the Lijiang VOR. We'll be tracking that outbound. And basically, we're just going to want to line up this, we want to be going directly away from this, NDB. But we won't know the distance until we pick up the next one at Lijiang, which is going to be on 113.7. So in preparation, there's a few different things you do when you're doing these DC6 flights, and there's a bit of a routine. So I always go put it in Gyropilot first, so it'll just maintain heading and attitude. So that way I don't mess around. If I mess around with the radios, we're not going to swap just yet to the next VOR. But we can plan the turn. So if we're going to... When we turn, we're just going to give a little bit of right-hand turn. It doesn't have to be very much. We're not turning very much. Just until we come to about 102. And again, they're small gauges. They're not going to be... Doesn't have to be alien precision. But there we go. So now we're on course to head to the Lijiang VOR, outbound from the NDB we're over now. And we're not going to use localizer mode this time because we're not actually tracking a VOR. We're just going to that ADF there. So now, just to demonstrate, we're going to round out into cruise. Oops. Nope, we're good. So now we're in basically a cruise configuration. And what I would need, we would like to build up a little bit of speed, obviously. But we're going to continue climbing to get over the rest of our, the rest of the terrain in front of us. We have about looking at our route, looking at the chart, we have about 15,000 feet that we're going to have to clear. 16,000, really, 15.7. So... we're coming up on the tallest part of the route. We're going to have to climb a little bit more. I'm going to shoot for 18,000 feet. And that should give us good to the 2,500 over any of the tallest points in that area. Now, to do that, we're going to need a little bit more help because our engines are going to start losing power. We're not quite there yet, but even if I max out power, your climb power setting is 40. I'm not quite getting to 40, so we need to use the superchargers. Now, to use the superchargers, we need to back off the power, actually. Coming back to around 28 knots, but I'm actually going out of order. So we're going to keep it at 30 and adjust our mixture. So mixture needs to come into the auto rich for climb. Our prop RPM, we need to be at 2400, which is about where we're at. And now we're going to come back on the power, actually, while we set up our superchargers. So we're going to turn on blowers 1 and 4, I think 2 and 3. You do them in pairs. That way, if you do blow out an engine, you have 2 others that are hopefully good. And see what comes out, the power comes up to 40 inches of manifold pressure now. Lots of good science behind it. Rob from PMDG explains it pretty well in his tutorial videos. Those are all really good for understanding some of the theory. But that's really it. And I show you this not because it's particularly interesting or engaging content, but because it does demonstrate some of the routines that you do when you're flying the DC6. And it's these kind of small routines that really, I think, make the difference from in-flight procedures. Whether it's the little procedures with, not tracking VORs that you're going to change out of, or how you manipulate the autopilot is just it requires a little bit more thinking ahead on your part as the pilot. You need to be smooth with the autopilot, otherwise you're going to get jerked around and bounce around, and it's not going to be a very good ride. You need to know. You need to be careful with your superchargers. If I just was at full climb power and turned the superchargers on, yeah, I would have like 55 inches of manifold pressure, and it could blow the engine out. Right now, I have an engine out. So again, it's these kind of little procedures that I think are fun, and you get used to it, and it just kind of develops into a nice rhythm in the cockpit while you're in cruise. Alright, so we're going to continue climbing on out, and I'm just going to keep advancing the throttles and to make sure that we're at 40 inches of manifold pressure throughout the climb. And we're going to be crossing, again, the meat of our route right now, the tallest peaks. So, strap in, it might get a little bumpy, but should be good views. Alright, so we're well and truly crossing the hump now. I'm going to run the cruise checklist. They'll take control back. Well, we talked about the VOR. We're going to hit... we've picked up the Lijiang VOR. We're now 100 miles from it, counting down towards it. We're following the white line. At this point, we can tune in the radio we need to fly, which is 102. And if we've been right in our calculations, it should line up just right. And it does, so that's good. So we can go over to the localizer mode. It'll just automatically track that in towards that VOR. Ooh, these mountains are massive. Frighteningly tall. 15,000 feet, 16,000 feet. And these aren't even the tall ones. The tall ones are over there. Right up into 24,000 feet. I've flown entire cruises less than 24,000 feet. Wild. So we're just cruising along, but we do have the Lijiang VOR now tuned in. We're going direct to it 60 miles. To that, and then we'll be making our turn, our final big turn towards Kunming. And I'll figure out, we'll have to start calculating when we should be coming down. Alright, so we're well on our way now. We are about 11 miles from the Lijiang VOR. It's out in this kind of plain up here. There's, I believe, a city of Lijiang. And now we're firmly into China. Now once we hit the Lijiang VOR, we're going to turn right to a heading of 120, and we'll follow the 120 radial outbound from the Lijiang VOR on 113.7, and then we'll be heading towards another VOR station, so we can pick that up on our way in. While we're doing that, we can just tune that in. It's going to be 110.8, I believe. We already have it in nav too, but 110.8, so it's ready to go. Now this is crazy terrain. That's a height of 18,000 feet. And now imagine doing this, but in an airplane that is less powerful and less well equipped. And that's what the Allies were doing during World War II. Flying in a less lower powered airplane than what we have now. And adding in, being intercepted by enemy air forces. This would be a challenging flight. And this is also a nice day for it. Imagine bad weather. Could be really fun challenge for you if you want to, if you want a good challenge. Bad weather Himalaya run in the DC6. So 5 miles now we're going to start. We're going to go into gyropilot mode. We're just going to keep that dialed in, and then we're going to change our heading to 120 here, and then we're going to wait for the white arrow to flip around, and that's how we know we've crossed over the VOR station. We've entered the zone of confusion. Slight right turn, and then we will have a 165 nautical mile leg down into Kunming. So the last thing we get to talk about on our final leg of the trip here, we have about 165 nautical miles to go. Now we do need to think about when we're going to descend. We're at 18,000 feet right now. We will need to be at field elevation at Kunming. That's going to be 6,200 feet. Now, to figure out when we need to descend, the rule of thumb is 5 nautical miles per 1,000 feet. So, I have done this beforehand, because you don't do math on camera. 18,000 minus 6,200 is 11,800 feet we need to lose. Multiply that by 5 nautical miles per foot. We'll round up to 12, because it'll give us a little extra room. That's 60 nautical miles. Plus we need a good 20 nautical miles to slow down once we're at altitude. So we need to be descending a minimum of 80 nautical miles before we hit Kunming. Now, that means that we'll have to think about the terrain, because we do have some 10,000 foot terrain around, but that's not quite right, because we need to be at 3,000 feet. It's 18,000 minus... It's really 9,200. And that's going to be 8,800 feet. 5, we'll call that 9,000 feet. 45, okay. So that's not right, so 45 plus 20. That's right, okay. So we are now outbound from the Lijiang VOR on the 120 radial. We have about 165 nautical miles to go. If we tune over, we're 17 miles from Lijiang now. If we go to N2, we should, hopefully soon, get the Panlong VOR on 110.8. But we don't quite have it yet. So we'll keep checking that and make sure we get that last VOR in, but that'll tell us how far we are. Now, we need to descend well before we actually get there. We need to plan it out. And the general rule of thumb is going to be 5 nautical miles per foot to descend. Per 1,000 feet, I should say. Now, I've done this math on the back of my scratch pad already, so I'm not doing this live. 18,000 feet, we need to be at field elevation of 6,200 feet, plus 3,000 feet to intercept. We'll probably shoot an ILS inbound. That leaves us at 8,800 feet, so we'll say we need to be 9,000 feet. We need to lose 9,000 feet. Now, 45 nautical miles is 9,000 times 5 nautical miles per 1,000 feet. So will take us 45 nautical miles to descend at that rate, and then we need to add 20 nautical miles to slow down. So 65 nautical miles away from, I mean, we can say the Panlong VOR since it's 20 nautical miles away. So we'll aim for 65 nautical miles from Panlong to start the descent. And just for my health, I want to make sure that we're actually right. 65 nautical miles minus 165 nautical miles. So even if we don't find the Panlong VOR, we need to be descending 100 nautical miles past the Lijiang VOR. So once this reads 100, we need to start descending. Again, just kind of some of the fun back-of-the-envelope stuff you have to work out with the DC6. It is, I don't know, I think if you find that kind of thing interesting, the airplane management stuff interesting, this is an interesting little side aspect to flying something like the DC6. Okay, so we're counting up to 95 nautical miles now. Obviously, night has fallen. We're going to be doing a nighttime approach into Kunming. And we're going to descend a little cautiously. We're going to start our descent, but we're going to have a floor of about 10,200 feet until we get to where the VOR is supposed to be. Now, you'll notice that it still hasn't come in on 110.8. So it may not be functioning in the sim. That's okay. It happens. It happens all the time in, like, the UK. So we'll work around it by holding on to the last VR, the Lijiang VR, as long as we can. We're at 98 nautical miles now. We will be there in about 20 minutes. Or, well, no, that doesn't work because we're going outbound. So you see, we're hitting 100 nautical miles away from the Lijiang VR now. We'll keep that counting up until it's 165 nautical miles, or we lose it, whichever comes first. At that point, we'll have to do some dead reckoning based on our speed. But for now, we are at 100 nautical miles, and we're just going to take off, altitude hold, and just gently start our descent. Now we're probably tacking on another 20 miles to it, so I'm going to descend slowly at about 500 feet per minute. And again, we're going to have a floor probably of 12,000 feet until we get much closer, and then 10,000 feet once we get in there. Just because of the terrain around the city, I'm not convinced that we won't hit anything. Because there are some high mountains. And then if all else fails, we'll look for the VOR, or we'll look for the ILS frequencies, which I have one of these over here on nav2. 111.3 is one of the runway ILS frequencies. Eventually, we'll get direction information to that, although the ranges are usually much smaller. Alright, so we're going to level off here 11,500 feet. We have some tall terrain. It should be about at highest 10,200 feet. So we're going to avoid that, stay at 11,500, and just start slowing down a little bit as we get into range. We have about 150 nautical miles now from Lijiang. So 15 miles from here, we'll make our right-hand turn due south, 180, and then we'll start looking for the, and we actually got it. So we got the VOR, we've got our nav2 tuned to the ILS for runway 21. Winds are calm at Kunming right now, so we're going to come in just the way we came straight in off. So we really can navigate off of that right now. But we'll get a little closer to our waypoint before we turn south. Now the airport should be off over here. The city is the big light down on our right-hand side. The airport is a ways north and east of the city. And we're about 10 miles from the runway, so we're a little higher than I'd like to be, 10,000 feet. But we're lining up okay. I'm going to start a right-hand turn towards the runway. And just start being fairly gentle. We can also come back a little bit more on the power. Still maintaining power, but just coming back a little more since we got to dump some altitude. And at this point, even, you can really take control back from the autopilot. And start to fly like a real pilot again. We're a little late on the in-range checks. We may have to circle around.
Fuel booster pumps. On low. Fuel tank selectors. Mains on, cross feed off. Hydraulic bypass valve. Down. No smoking signs. On. In-range checks complete. Flaps 20. Safety flaps 20.
Alright, so we have the runway in sight. I'm just going to enter a bit of a left-hand turn. Because we were a little late on the descent, and that's exactly what will happen if you're a little late on the descent. We've got too much speed. And we're still at about 10,000 feet.
Extras rich fleet.
So we're a little higher than I'd like to be.
Pitch to set. Gear up and down, please. Gear up and down. Gear down and locked. 3 mains. Ramps. 2500 RPM. 2500 RPM set. Cow flaps. Plus 3 degrees. Cow flaps set. ADI. ADI off. ADI is off. Landing lights. Speed good. Extending lights. Lights extended and on. Carbine. Carbine cold. Set cold. Before landing checks complete.
Alright. So we've got the before landing checks done. We're going to finish our little embarrassing circle. ATC is going to hold everybody up coming into Kunming for a little bit while the DC6 figures it out. And then we'll shoot the final approach. Alright, so we're coming in. I'm going to shoot for runway 22. Instead, because 21's not giving me glide slope. So we're going to go into 109.3. See if we get anything else, otherwise we'll just be doing it by eye. And we're about 6 miles away, 8,000 feet. So we're about 2,000 feet over the over where we want to be. I'm going to set BMEP to 100 and start coming down on the flaps. So I'm going to give it 1 knock. We should be at 30. And we're looking okay. We're decent, although a little off to the left. And that's actually looking pretty good. I'm going to give it flaps 40. And a little high still, so let's go full flaps. On 4 mile final. Just trying to set us up right to left. Again, just not trying to overcorrect. Still a bit high. Still just a slight bit unstable coming in. That's all right. We're looking okay. There's the threshold. And it looks like there's the touchdown zone. Cut the power. I'm not too bothered because we literally have miles of runway. All right. We made it. Welcome to China, everybody. Welcome to Kunming. Well, I'm going to figure out how to get off this runway and where the taxiways are. We'll catch up with you when we get up to the gate. All right, welcome everybody to Kunming in Western China. Big airport, big runway. I thought 4,000 meters was certainly exaggerating, but maybe not. So, not a perfect approach. It's a shame that the ILS didn't tune in, and we didn't get glide slope. But that's all right. We made it work, and that's part of the fun of the DC6. Is it takes some practice and some skill. I'm not even that current in it, and you could really tell on my approach. So it takes a little bit of work to be current and to be good at it and to do it smoothly and to do it right and to do it well. And if you want it, I mean, the PMDG tutorials they put out are really great for learning about the airplane, for learning about the tutorial series. It's a really good tutorial series. So there's plenty of resources to fly it. There's a lot of interesting places to fly it. I think we'll be flying more kinds of these routes with the DC6, more historical routes, and I'll try and incorporate that on the channel too. But it is good fun. It makes you think ahead, and when you're out of place like we kind of were on that final approach, you're not going to be able to really... There aren't a lot of quick fixes for being out of place other than going around or circling or doing something like that. So again, it makes me a better pilot in that way. Not tonight, obviously, but it is good fun. And yeah, it's just a really nice model, really complex airplane. There's a lot to dig into. So I think if you are at all interested in this airplane, definitely like it. And yeah, it's a really cool addition to Flight Sim. So that's it for this episode of Why You Should Fly. As always, if you have any questions, comments, ideas for other episodes, drop in the comment section below. This has been VFR. Take it easy, y'all.